Thank you for coming. And this is my first time here at the Rust and Tell. This is also the first time in 2 years that I speak publicly, so I don't know how I will do it. So today I'm going to talk about a pet project I have on my hands. I apologize in advance because I won't show code. I had this code for 2 weeks. I was super low in energy, so I was working on the algorithms and I was working on testing some ideas to see if it was possible. So yeah, I will show you what's this about. So I'm working on this tool. It's called Avatar CLI. The idea is to help people to just wrap Dockerized commands without all these issues that usually people have, like having problems with permissions, having problem with keys management, and other stuff that you could face. Yeah, this is the logo that I did some weeks ago. Oh fuck, what happened here? Oh, so this is me. I'm from Barcelona. I'm a software developer, mostly on backend, machine learning, data engineering. This is my blog, and yeah. From time to time I work on some pet projects. These are my last 2 open source projects that I was working on. Basically I was working at Thircash on a cryptocurrency called Unit-E, and another pet project that it's surprisingly being used by some people. It's Jupyter PHP. It's a kernel for the Jupyter notebook, so people could use PHP on it. But I'm not paying too much attention to it. So yeah, if someone wants to pick it to maintain it or something, feel free. About Avatar CLI, this started with some small thing, with some experience that I had in Barcelona. Back then I started to work in a company, and they were kind of messy when they had to deal with all their software. So they had this kind of mixed environment. Some of them they were working with Vagrant. Some of them they were working with Docker. Also, they were working with Docker in a very strange way. So they were using it as if they were virtual machines, and that was in part because the guys that introduced Docker, they did it in a way that it was only being useful for the Linux guys. So the people that was working with Mac OS, because they were using different user IDs, all the scripts, they were just failing miserably. Obvious drawbacks of this kind of split environment. Typical, it works on my machine, but it does not work on the other. The tests were just fucking terrible because you know, like they were filling up the databases, and they rerun the test, and oh, it was working before, now no, and now it's working, but why it was not working before? Also, for example, when I arrived, it took me like the complete day to set up the environment, because every time that I followed a step, you know, there was a guy on my back saying, "Oh, sorry, I forgot this point. You have also to follow this step or this other step or this other step," right? Also, when they wanted to, you know, connect to GitHub to download some package or whatever, if it was a private package, they had problems with the SSH keys. So it was a nightmare, right? I started to work on that. I took some time, and I created a set of scripts. It was just Bash, but it was not without pain. So we had some problems with that. First of all, one of the things that I faced is that the default Bash in Mac OS is completely outdated because of this license problem, that they don't want to deal with the GPL3. Also, I didn't want to rely on basic POSIX shell because it's like too constraining, so the code would be too complicated. There are also minor differences on how to pass some parameters to tools like grep. And we also have, we even had a guy that was, you know, he was obsessed on working on his Windows machine. And I had to try to adapt all those scripts for him, but it was impossible. So at some point I just desisted. Okay, so at some point it started to work, and people seemed to be happy. But in some companies they decide to work for their monorepo approach. We did completely the opposite. So for every small project we had a small repository, which was nice because we had a lot of autonomy. But the time of integrating all that stuff, it was complicated. And because of that, we increased the complexity of those scripts. So they allowed us to execute tests that took code from many repositories, that executed this code simultaneously, like first set up the databases on Docker containers, then run the migrations, then start this microservice, then this other microservice, and then run the test. Also, for each test, we created a random Docker network, so we could run a lot of tests in parallel. So I was kind of proud of that, but actually it was just too complex, because at some point it was. What I did? So problem is that because of the way I made this code, bash scripts, this is difficult to make it modular. This is difficult. It's very difficult to share this code. At some point, we started to have a lot of duplicated code. At some points, in some repositories, we had this completely outdated code. Oh fuck! I remember that I fixed that. Why 2 months later this is still here? So. Okay, so we had a lot of duplicated code, and it was becoming a problem. So at some point I decided, okay, let's try to centralize this in some way. But this is a problem because this is the chicken and egg problem. I wanted to keep some properties of this thing, so we achieved this stage where there was no need to install any single development tool on the computer besides the IDE, Docker, and Git. And we had this chicken and egg problem. If these tools had to be installed somehow from the repositories, then I needed more scripting, and so on, right? So okay, this led me to think at some point, okay, let's make a single binary without no extra dependencies that does all this stuff, and we'll try to get rid of the complex stuff. Let's make something relatively simple that at least allows to centralize the more difficult stuff. So yeah, while I was doing that, I was checking if I would do that in Python, in JavaScript, TypeScript. The project was called back then Murai, because of the name of the company where I was working. So having a single binary was quite easy. It was a very easy thing to do, because there are a lot of tools to pack a lot of scripts in one single binary, or even you could even if you're working with bash or shell scripting, you could pack everything together and then unpack that. There are some weird tricks like what Docker Compose does, for example, or even AppImage. It's doing something like that. It unpacks everything in a temporary directory, and then it runs an exec command on top of that. The problem with the dependencies was not so easy to solve, because for example, the default Python in Mac at the time, I think it was Python 2.7. The default Python in other system was another version. And yes, I could stick to the older libraries, but I wanted a little bit more of freedom. So yeah, I made some experiments. I could compile this a statically linked Python binary and embed it into an AppImage format binary or something, but this would only work on Linux. I should give support also to macOS. So at some point I just stopped. I just devoted more time to other more important stuff for the company. And here is where the parent of Avatar dies. Okay. So the thing is that it's a stupid project, it's not that important, but I wanted to finish it and I wanted to do it correctly this time. So I just said, okay, I will do this, but I will just stick to one very simple feature, which is wrapping Dockerized commands. I will use Rust, and I will tell you why I decided to pick Rust. And it will be open source this time, because before it was just something for the company, and in part because of that, I was the only one devoting time to it, and also my colleagues had overconfidence on me, too much confidence. So they didn't even pay attention to learn how it worked. So I was the fixer, as I wrote in the previous slides, and I wanted to share something, and that's why I wanted to make it open source. And so, why Rust? Of course, I wanted to learn more about Rust and experiment. There's something that I really love about some languages, which is strong typing, memory safety. I really like to have some functional features inside Rust, not only the strong typing and memory safety, but other stuff that it's there, and it's really nice, like pattern matching. Sorry, I'm a little bit sorry. So yeah, that would be nice. Thank you very much. Also, it was I was not I was not really surprised by that, because Rust is a very modern language, but I was really pleased that its standard library is very complete. And I would say that, for example, for the cases that I'm working on here, it's way nicer than, for example, what you could find on Python. It's better designed. For example, if I have to work with processes, or if I have to work with paths, or this kind of stuff, it's better designed than Python's library. And this was one of the reasons as well. Of course, it targets many platforms like Linux, Mac OS, Windows. Thank you very much. Thank you. And yeah, this is not really important, because most of the stuff is being done with scripting languages, and no one complains about that. But from time to time, people like to brag about the performance of their stuff. So yes, Rust is a very performant language, and this is something that attracted me. Also, as I said before, it's straightforward to create a single statically linked binary without having to rely on clever tricks. And also, it interfaces nicely with C, and this is not the case right now for me. I don't need it, but could be the case, because this is like a very systems oriented tool, and this is something that, okay, maybe at some point in the future I would need it, so why not, So, as I said to you, I don't have like much to show you, and that's why I say promise here. But just go with me, please. First point, general purpose version pinning for the tools, not for the libraries, not for anything else. So just for the tools. And for example, for Node.js, there's people using NVM, or there's this new tool, FNM, which is made in ReasonML, which is kind of cool. It's way faster than NVM, but it's kind of the same thing.
Same as Yarn and stuff?
Yeah, no, it's not. It's in this case, it's so it allows you to switch from one version of Node to other, So it's like doing the same that the people does with libraries, but just with the tools, right? What I wanted to provide, and this is like a very stupid thing, because actually it's mostly for newbies. But I consider myself most of the times like that. I want to do easy stuff, and what I want to do is, okay, I arrive to a company, and I don't know which tools they are using, so I download the repository, and without installing any tool, I just could start doing things. So that's what I want so this is the point where I want to arrive. So I just clone the project, I go into the project, And given the point that the project has been configured in a way that it can be used like that, because of course it requires previous work, I just type avatar install. This does some stuff that I will explain later. And this allows me to to enter into a subshell that gives me access to all these tools that are being required to work on this specific project. This could be NPM, Node.js, Python, PHP, whatever we need, okay? And these tools that are being accessed, in reality, are working as Docker processes, as Docker containers, in a way that allows us to, not having problems with with file permissions. When by default Docker containers are running in root mode, as a root user. Sorry. Also, of course, you have to mount specifically all the volumes. If you are working, for example, let's say that you are installing a package with npm. In the first place, you won't have any problem. But okay, let's say that you are trying to install a private project. At that point, you will need your SSH keys. And what people would do, without thinking much, is, okay, I'll mount my SSH keys. What happens if your SSH keys have a passphrase? Okay, you have to type the passphrase every single time. It is a solution. You, instead of mounting the SSH keys, you mount the Unix socket that connects with the SSH agent, that allows you to avoid having to type the password, the passphrase every single time. Another problem that you could face with a package manager in this case, which is probably the most common usage that I'm devising, is what happens with the caching. So npm has this super big cache, pipm, pip, all these tools have a lot of caching mechanisms. And if you are just running the containers, they will create the cache inside the container, and then they will wipe the cache once you discard the container. Because another thing that I wanted to ensure is that all the containers were stateless. So not to avoid polluting the space with just random containers that are being created one after another. So I wanted to be sure that all the cache, the volumes that map to the proper caches are being properly mapped. And that's what I want to provide with this tool. Of course, multi-platform, Linux and macOS for now. I don't know if it's really possible to go beyond that. I know that on Windows with this Linux subsystem version 2, because with the version 1 it's impossible. With version 2, it seems that it opens the door to do something, but it still would be Linux. So that's why it will be possible. And I don't know about BSD or other systems. I should do some research on the topic, because I don't know how compatible are they with these container technologies. Mostly Docker. Maybe they have their own stuff. I don't know. I didn't check. I'm being honest with that. So, but if someone knows, then I would be glad to know. And as I told you, zero problems with file permissions, SSH keys, and package manager caches. Sorry, there was this point. I almost forgot to write this, and I was like, I had this kind of, okay, I have to write this also. So we think mostly about these tools like working interactively, and this is nice, but from time to time we also do scripts. And it's good that the tools are being able to distinguish when they are in an interactive environment or not. This is not very complicated, but it has to be done like on purpose. Otherwise, the tool will be just dumb, and it won't be able to distinguish. So this is also something that I want to provide. What I don't promise, because it's just impossible. So it's not possible to wrap everything just magically. Some work has to be done for every specific tool, or for most specific tools. So my idea was, okay, for some very popular tools like npm, Python, PHP, blah blah blah, I will hard code just the code. The code will be just hard coded into the tool, but for other tools, the user will have to provide some extra configuration. That configuration could be placed inside the Docker images as metadata. That would be the ideal solution, because then you could create a lot of projects and this configuration is just placed in one single place. Or if for whatever reason you are in a hurry, you could place this configuration in the configuration file, but this is not as portable. And of course, the second point, I can't promise this. If you want to try to make something really complex that one tool calls another and another and another, and each tool belongs to a different Docker image, this won't be possible because, first of all, I'm not trying to implement any Docker in a Docker. It's possible, but that would be a nightmare. I don't know, if something is really creative and wants to contribute to do that, okay, but I won't do that. I don't see the point. Okay, so let's see how it should work, okay, because I talked about what I want to provide, but how it should work. Okay, this is just the preparation. This is what people really enjoys. Okay, because I will enter into this box later, okay? So it's not really needed to pay much attention to this, but basically what's important here is that we have this settings file. We also have to take care of the environment, because when we enter into the Subshell, we have to set some environment variables to tell all the processes that interact with this environment that the environment is active. And we also have some log files that kind of catch this relation between some binary names and some Docker image names, and also version pinning if we are relying on semantic versioning. So this kind of describes the flow. It's kind of provisional. I mean, you could see here a very ugly panic, you know, like, okay, if there's an error, yeah, I could show up, yeah. But yeah, so in the end, there are two possible ending points, this big box and this green point. This is where the magic happens. This is the simplest step. Basically, how it will work. I just copied something. I will go into this later, but I want to explain it now because. So I don't know if any of you knows how Snap works, Ubuntu Snap. If you see how the binaries are designed, they are not. They are just symlinks with the name of the binary, and all of these binaries point to the Snap binary. All of them. There's no metadata. The only metadata that they use to decide what has to be executed is the name of the symlink. It's there's where all the magic relies. So basically, that's what I want to do. When I set up the environment, I modify the path. This path adds a subdirectory where I have like a ton of symlinks where all these tools that I installed belong. All these symlinks point to Avatar, and Avatar, when it detects that it has been executed through this name, it matches the name with through these cached files that I mentioned before, and so name matches the image, and it gathers all the configurations that it requires to know how to call this command, because okay, which volumes I have to mount, is it interactive or not, or you know. So this is how it would work, and this is just like basic commands like init, shell for the subshell, deactivate, like go out of the shell. This wouldn't be a subcommand of Avatar. It would be a small shell script inside the binary directory that does this kind of unsource that you know, and clean and help. Clean is just remove whatever you created in this space. So Commands. This init, it would create a YAML file. It would ask like, okay, give me the names of the images that you want. And if you're lucky enough and you give the names of images that are already supported, it will create a file and you would do anything else. Okay, I want whatever. It's okay, you have it. Install. This is funnier, and this is kind of doing what I told you before. It has to read the configuration file. Of course, the configuration defines which images are going to be used. We pull these images. Why? Why we do that before anything else? Because we could gather meta information from these images that could be needed for these next steps. So each step could overwrite the configuration that has been defined on the previous step. Of course, we check the hard-coded settings that are in the image. If there's some, oh, I wrote it. Of course, yeah, hard-coded inside the avatar binary. If there's some embedded information in the image, it will overwrite whatever I hard-coded. If there's something in the configuration file, of course, it will overwrite whatever was in the metadata of the image. And after that, we'll create just these symlinks that I mentioned. Okay, and this has to be cached because otherwise it would be too slow to do all this resolution process every time that we call a binary. Okay, shell. This is when we activate the subshell. The idea is that to provide two mechanisms is not, I think that there was some mention before, but there's this subshell, but there's a better way to do it. Although it's not so nice when you are typing, which is just doing a source of a small shell script, and then you don't create a subshell. So this is better for example, for scripting. But in case that you are just working on your command line, it's not a real problem. Well, I mentioned a problem that I faced, and it took me some time to just understand what was happening, but it's just a minor stuff. So, okay, the shell will create a subshell. How? It will set some environment variables. First of all, it will define where the project is, which is the directory. It will also point to the specific avatar binary that it's using, because although I'm not providing support for it now yet, I want to do it in the future, like to allow to work with different binary versions. So it would be possible to just make a copy of a specific version of avatar inside this binary, and then whenever you go out, so if you're for whatever reason you're using a different avatar with a different version, it will just replace the binary with an execb syscall. So it would be like if you just call the correct one. That's why I wanted to have this Avatar CLI path variable here. Of course, we modify the path environment variable, as I mentioned. And this is the point. Okay, how do we create a subshell? There's people working with ZSH, people with CSH, with Bash, with Fish, with, we have plenty of shells. And I don't want to prefer one over another. So it's possible to detect what was the outer shell, and given that information, we can replace the avatar process by this shell that we had before. It just will be nested, and we do that with this marvelous execb call that POSIX Systems provides. It's not available in Windows. That's a pity. Yeah. Something that I found that I dislike it very much was that some variables like PS1 and PS2 that are used to define the prompt are not passed when, so there are some ways, but I think that it's kind of strange. So the only clean way is to reload all the configurations. But this is quite nasty, and this is something that maybe in the future I will do just to recover all the prompt that you had before. But if in a few days when my first demo is on the air, available for the people, when they do the subshell, they will just see that the prompt changes, and I don't like it. But I spent 2 days digging into that, and it was just a loss of time. Okay, this is the run step. As I mentioned, this is what I mentioned before. We identify which is the image through the symlink name, then we do this mapping. And of course, once we have identified the image and all that stuff, we have to take into account our user ID, if the process is interactive, and all this stuff. Okay, there are other commands that I didn't describe because actually I have to think a little bit more, but I know that I want to implement them, like an update. This is important if we are dealing with semantic versioning, like if we don't want to specify the exact version, but just the first minor version. Then we should lock this build version of the images to avoid that some people have different versions on the development team. So update has to be an explicit step. It can be accidental or it has to be explicit. This add would be just a simpler way to add new images without having to go to the YAML file. And this audit, this is just, I was inspired by these nice messages that I'm receiving these past days from NPM, you know, that it's telling me that my code is full of security holes. And actually, I think that it's a very nice idea and I want to implement it. I don't know how I would do that because this implies having access to security databases and all that stuff. But this is something that would be really, really, really nice. Yeah, there's not much about Rust, as I told you. I'm using a very subset of Rust. I'm using just pattern matching, a very small set of cargo packages, just Serde for the YAML stuff. This dirs because it gives me this a small database of directories given a specific operating system. And actually, you know, it's as simple as dealing with environment variables, with process arguments. I have to deal with the commands. And I also use this straight command X because it gives me access to this POSIX call. Otherwise, it's not available. And I have to say that something that it's kind of problematic for me, and it's also error handling. I'm used to just bubble up things like and also I was more used to web development, not like command line tools. So I'm not really sure how to make this architecture in a clean way. You know, like usually in web development you have like this layered architecture, your onion architecture or hexagonal architecture if you go like really serious. But here, yeah, something similar could be done, but I'm not really sure because as you saw before, this flow path, flow diagram that I showed, it was kind of messy, and I don't know how to. So yeah, now it's a mess. It's a set of experiments here and there. Okay, I checked that I could do this exec. I checked that I could do these calls to Docker. I checked, and I have to put all these pieces together. And I guess that in a few days it will be available. And yeah, that's all. Thank you very much for your attention. And sorry. Yeah, I know that you want to end this, but yeah, things that I want to do. As I told you, there's everything to do yet, but of course I want to document and all that stuff. But something that I want to do, and I wanted to mention it, it's bootstrapping. I want to run the Rust compiler like through a Docker container with this tool. So that would be. That just for fun, I want to do that, and I wanted to mention it before leaving. That would be really nice to do bootstrapping and running the Rust compiler through Avatar. And yeah, that's all. Thank you very much.